Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Conclave 2024 of Pratidin Media Group. We all know that climate change is the biggest problem of the world in these days. And what we have seen, what a terrible situation in African countries like Namibia, Zimbabwe, and South Sudan, that there is a huge crisis. There is a huge crisis for food, for drought, and due to the climate change, and wild animals are killed and distributed amongst people. That is the real scenario of climate change we have. And Northeast India, especially Assam, we are also facing the same problem. So today we are going to discuss about climate change, adaptation and resilience strategies towards addressing the challenges. So we have with us Professor Khan Kham Chuan Hausing. You are welcome, sir. Then we have with us Dr. Mitul Borua. You are also welcome. Next, we have with us Dr. Dipankar Sohoria. Welcome, sir. And finally, we have with us Jyotindra Sharma. You are also welcome, sir. So, as we are going to discuss about the climate change and climate strategies, I have a question to Dr. Sohoria first on climate actions. As we all have known that climate has already changed, but the big question is how to deal with that and who is to blame for it. Sir, what's your take on this?
Yeah. Thank you, Nayan. First of all, I'd like to thank Mrinal Talukdar, Pratidin, and Rishi. He's an ex-Indian, I'm also an ex-Indian, for inviting me to this panel. Climate change is real and we are all facing it. And especially in the Northeast. If I speak about Northeast, we have seen the changes, the erratic rainfall, the sudden rise of temperature. Last September, few days back, you have seen the temperature rising so much. Then you have the extreme events that are happening and disasters happening. Northeast is the most vulnerable place in India that is affected by climate change, and we really need to work on it. It is not something that, I say that I am affected and you are not affected. Each of one is affected. And I have seen a lot of senior citizens and also many of us neglecting the subject. We all have to be aware. Awareness is the first action that we have to take. As I am speaking about climate action, the awareness is the first action. Then the different steps that we can take, what the government is doing. India has some goals to achieve its climate goals. You may be aware of that we have said that at the Paris Agreement that we will keep our average temperature below 2 degrees centigrade. India has a target of 2070 to become carbon neutral. We have our SDG goals to be met by 2030, and Assam has to present, and Northeast as a whole. But seeing our climatic condition there and the vulnerability and the different floods, erosion, everything is affected, and it is not only a particular department that has to act. It's affecting our social life, it's affecting our economy, it's affecting our environment. Everything is related. One is related to each other. Therefore, each step that we take, I'll come in the second round, that climate change is happening, it's a reality, and there are a lot of steps and actions that would be taken and has to be taken to overcome it and contribute to India's NDC goals. Thank you.
Yeah, we will discuss about climate actions with examples. So my next question to Dr. Borua. To fight against climate change, we have to adopt climate resilience strategies. So what are the unique climate strategies and opportunities we have?
Thank you, Naren. First of all, again, thank you, Mrinal Talukdar and Pratidin for inviting me. This is, of course, an important topic, and I will speak about climate change and adaptation and resilience, what are the things we can do. But I really want to step back a little bit, if I may. I think somehow like climate change, the whole quote unquote climate change seems to sometimes, which is absolutely real, climate change is real, it's happening, we are facing it, and it's urgent, we need to act. But I would still say that as an academic, I find climate change kind of hijacking a lot of environmental conversation, some of which are not directly related to climate change. And when we talk about Northeast, for example, and Assam and Northeast in general, I would like to step back to say what are the environmental problems we are facing. And biggest crisis that's facing Assam in particular is flood and erosion, right? So we know that every year it's getting flooded several times. Erosion, just to give you one figure, Gorakhohonia, Banpani aru Gorakhohonia, right? So erosion in Assam since 1950 till now, we have lost 7.4% of the land mass, that is 8,000 square kilometer. 8,000 borgo kilometer, just imagine that. Now, one rain, Guwahati gets flooded, right? If you look at the hills, other hill states, beyond Assam, like they're rapidly changing, rampant urbanization, infrastructures spreading to places that they shouldn't. So my point is, these are not directly related to climate change. These are issues of environmental governance, right? These are really, we really need to, like flood in Assam is not because of climate change. Climate change is making it worse, right? Climate change is making erosion worse. So I think what we really need to think about is larger questions of accountability of the state, the whole question of how do you govern, right? And I will come to later, how do we include people in policies and all of that. I think that's part of the action discussion. But I will come to, I very deliberately am not talking about climate change because I really want to foreground that some of the environmental issues facing us as a whole and Northeast in particular are questions of everyday environmental governance. They are not directly because of climate change. Yeah, I think we need to kind of...
I will come on later on.
Yeah.
So now my next question to Dr. Housing. Dr. Housing, we know that there is a good relationship between climate change and policymakers. So my question to you that how can our political system support climate change, climate actions, and how to balance the economic growth with climate actions?
Nayant, thank you for this question. And I would also like to thank the Pratidin Time team for having me on board. I think we need to take things into broader perspective. And one of the things that the way in which climate change had adversely affect our actually existing living conditions has also got to do with the way policy frameworks got enacted over time. And I have in mind the logic of developmentalism, which over time transformed Northeast India into a zone of extractive economic activities. And remember that as Assam, for example, got globally integrated into the world capitalist system thanks to the discovery of tea, of oil, and subsequently a lot of mining activities, much of the economic disasters, or for that matter, climatic change, and in fact could also be seen as aggravating, livelihood issues. And that is precisely where I think that the kind of developmentalism, which is not natural, but which is a constructed idea, which construct people in places developed or undeveloped according to certain metrics, need to be rethought in ways that involve communities as important stakeholders in the way climate policy and, for that matter, environmental policies are formulated. And that is why I think one of the commendable things that most of the state governments does in Northeast India and, for that matter, other parts of India is, for example, the establishment of a Department of Social Forestry, for example, which in effect seeks to, emphasize the importance of equity and justice in terms of managing the forest as well as of the environment. Because until and unless you involve important stakeholders in such basic management of ways that directly have important implication on their livelihoods, you cannot have a just environmental policy in place. And that is where I think the crux of the attention should be.
So my next question to Dr. Horma. Mr. Sharma, my question to you on climate-related and climate-resilient healthcare system, that we know that the climate change is affecting our health also. So my question to you that how can medicinal plant support climate-resilient healthcare system, especially in Assam?
So Nayan, it's a very the question. Intricately woven with our nature-based solutions and our health system. When we talk about this climate change, we should think about many of us we are actually not aware of. How people were concerned in the past about safety of our environment. If you look at the Indian Penal Code of 1860, I'm going back far ahead. 1860 Indian Penal Code, Section 267, 268, 278, 279. There are provisions for safety of prevention of water pollution, air pollution, and even destruction of our land masses. So that the impact of climate change actually that started the people, good people, they thought far ahead of us. And later on, of course, I just want to refer a very famous book on the end of nature by Bill McKibben, which is always in the news. Actually, he's one of the persons who actually gathered all the persons, thinkers from 7 continents to think about this climate change. About your specific question on this, how we climate resilient activities through your medicinal plants. See, in Assamese, we are the richest, the northeast particularly, in particular Assam. We have, over the years, we use a lot of plants for our healthcare. Amar Horor, Pispinor, Sohodor, Barikhon, Jikhon, Asana, that is the huge asset that the biodiversity conservation as a concept, by example, as an Amar Horor, Barikhone actually, that is the huge example for all of us to just follow and foster. Because, say, petrol who was say we go for Kaskal, gas who say we go for Vedali Lota, Aru Epine Mandhunia Thakile, Amar Hotunia Kodata Buligo Amar Jitu, at a plant as a mineral content খুব বেশি গতিকে ঠিক তেনেকুৱা ধৰণৰ বস্তুবিলাকো খাই আমি যেনেকৈ এতিয়া হগুনি লতাটো আছে হগুনি লতাৰ ওপৰত আমি যথেষ্ট প্ৰপাগেট কৰিছিলোঁ এজ এ পাৰ্চন ফ্ৰম দ্য ফৰেষ্ট ডিপাৰ্টমেণ্ট আমি দেখোঁ যে মানে হগুনি লতাটোৰ যিটো চাহিদা আছিলে সেইটো ক'ভিডৰ সময়ত পাৰ্টিকুলাৰলি এজ এ ফৰেষ্টাৰ আই ৱাজ কনজাৰ্ভেটৰ ফৰেষ্ট ইন দ্য নৰ্দাৰ্ণ চাৰ্কল when we started manufacturing this হাৰ্বেল আমাৰ হগুনি লতাৰ যিটো গিলৈ বুলি কয় ট্ৰেড মানে যিটো ৰেজিষ্টেঞ্চ দিব লাগে মানুহক মানে খোৱাৰ কাৰণে ফ্ৰণ্টলাইন ষ্টাফক সেইটো খুৱাই যাতে মানে ভালকৈ থাকিব পাৰে ক'ভিডৰ পৰা এটা পৰিত্ৰাণ পাব পাৰে উই ইউজ টু ডু দিছ আমাৰ এতিয়া অসমত যিমানখিনি থেকেৰা আছে পিপল আৰ নট নয়িং এনি হাউ মেনি থেকেৰাজ উই হেভ আমি উই স্পিক এবাউট 3-4 varieties of থেকেৰাজ গাৰ্চিনিয়া স্পেচিছ দ্য গাৰ্চিনিয়া গ্ল'বেলি ন'ন এজ এণ্টি অবেচিটি বা হাৰ্টৰ কাৰণে হ'ব পাৰে বৰ থেকেৰাৰ কথা কৈ আছে আজিকালি নিউজত ওলাই আছে. But we have as many as 20 thekeras. We are the richest state that way, biodiversity-wise. India, 34 species by world of 340. Not all those species of thekeras are edible. Into Amar Ahmad Jikinipai, mostly they are all edible, excepting 2 species. Manwe Dekhauna Hunana, both scientists have said this is very interesting that I should not blame the scientists or Jibilaka Kam Korea second to Thekar to Hosakama Jongot go Swanai.
সমাধানৰে মই আহিম আপোনাৰ ওচৰলৈ আমি ক'ব পাৰোঁ যে আমাৰ অসমৰ যিখিনি আমাৰ ট্ৰেডিশ্যনেল প্ৰেক্টিচেছ আছে সেইখিনি ইটছ এ গুড আনচাৰ টু কম্বেট ক্লাইমেট চেঞ্জ
Yes, that is what we should go ahead and nothing more than that and nothing less than that also actually we should adopt and go ahead with that only. Thank you.
So my next question to Dr. Sohoria, as we are talking about climate actions now. So I think it's better to discuss about more about climate actions. Can you explain more on that with some examples?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, very briefly, where I work in an institute called Tata Energy Research Institute. The first name, it was started by J.R.D. Tata in 1974, and it's completed 50 years, and now we are known as the Energy and Resource Institute. So we are one of the institutes that started, work on climate change way back in the late 80s. So as far as I gave this background because our institute has been working on climate change and action. And especially if I talk about climate change, what action we are taking, we have worked on the carbon finance part, which is so important because, you have the forest and you have the forest where you can generate revenue, forest conservation, and also for socio-economic development of the communities living in the fringe areas. So why carbon finance? It's all started from the Kyoto meet in 1974, Kyoto Protocol, when the Clean Development Mechanism starts, CDM, where you can sell your carbon credits. It's not rocket science for all of you. It's very simple. It's about trading of carbon credits. So as far as the carbons are concerned, what can be done? How can forests come in? Carbon credit is not only for the forestry sector. It is in the energy sector, in the renewable energy sector. It is in the waste, where lots of methane is generated, in the landfills, which you can capture. So all have contributions. Even the solar pumps that are replacing the diesel, irrigation pumps can be marketed in terms of carbon credit. But I'll talk about only the forestry sector, where the forest itself will generate revenue for its own conservation. So how we do it, that is a process that, will require some more, time to explain. But TERI is working across about 40 projects all over India and 5 projects in the northeastern region. One in Manas, one in Kaziranga. He was there as a director when he started off. It is a RED Plus project where we will estimate the carbon. The total number per ton of carbon is 1 credit. So we'll estimate the total carbon of Kaziranga, we'll estimate the total carbon of Manas, and then these credits can be sold in the international market through a very lengthy methodological process. And the whole thing is validated and verified. Then the carbon credits can be sold. It's something like share market, but it is of carbon. Now, we are also doing 2 more projects with Assam Agricultural University. I'm talking about the actual action that is happening. One on existing 1 crore plants in 10 districts of Assam. And also we are going for 1 crore new plantation in Assam, again in 10 districts with Agriculture University. One more is going on in Nagaland. Now, we have just started off last year, but I'll give you a fresh example that, carbon credit is not something that we are only speaking about. We have released carbon credits to the farmers of Punjab. Recently, the Honorable CM of Punjab released 10 crore to about 3,600 farmers across 2 divisions of forest in Punjab, and total they will receive 40 crores. That money in phases will be released to them. So what is the benefit of carbon finance? You are conserving your forest, you are getting economic benefit out of the forest, and therefore you have an impetus, you have got an impetus to conserve your forest. Now Punjab was for agroforestry, Assam is both for forestries and agroforestry. So it is you are actually selling carbon credit to a European country which is producing more carbon dioxide, and that carbon dioxide, they are paying us for offsetting the carbon here in Assam. Nothing is going out. We are calculating the number of carbon in tons. 1 ton of carbon we go and assess is 1 credit. So that gets a value of about $10. Depends, $8 to $15, $8 to $25 per credit. So that is sold in the international market. There are platforms that can be sold. There are Vera platforms. There are Gold Standard, the Plan Vivo. They are where these projects are registered. They sell it to the investor. And finally, the farmers will get the payment through an agency. Now, for case of Punjab, it is the forest department that has to invest, zero investment, but we paid it through the forest department, and they also got some finance for their conservation effort. So,
Dr. Sohoria, I have a question on this matter regarding the industry of Assam, because there is a huge loss of production in terms of production and quality due to climate change. if we go through the tea production data, we can find that in July 2023, there was a production of 92.70 million kilograms in July 2023. But in July 2024, the production of Assam tea was 78.30 million kilograms. So there is a huge loss in terms of production and quality. Is it applicable to our tea sector also?
Yeah, carbon finance is not applicable to the tea bushes. The carbon credits can be calculated from the shade trees. Because, we require new carbon to be deposited. Eta gosdal dangor hole hai carbon to deposit hobo. So we take 3 years, back calculation that, the carbons have been accumulated in a new plant. Old plants are not calculated because they already have the carbon in it. New plants, because they will grow and they will accumulate the carbon dioxide, they will take it and they will accumulate. Therefore, tea bushes are not counted, shade trees are counted, and to make the tea industry more, how they would adapt to the climate change, it is changing. The rainfall pattern, it's all shifting. The climate, weather has shifted. Therefore, you have to find resilient varieties. Toklai is there. You will have to find resilient varieties that can, pass through the drought, pass through the, waterlogged times. So there are different varieties that you have to find out. And also the pests have increased. So then you have other, varieties, and you will have to find organic ways. So there are methods. We have to, see, study, and find out resilient and adapted varieties of tea. That is from the production side. And from the carbon finance side, the shade trees can be counted, and it has to be a huge number to get the benefit of carbon credit.
Okay. Now my question to Dr. Borua. মই কিছু তথ্য মই ইয়ালৈ দিল্লীলৈ লৈ আহিছোঁ মই এইকাৰণে লৈ আহিছোঁ যে এখেতে কৈছে কিছু সময় আগত যে ফ্লাড এণ্ড ইৰোজন ইজ এ বিগ প্ৰব্লেম টু আছ চ' মই যদি চাওঁ যে ফ্ৰম 2017 to 2024 we have a loss of total loss in terms of amount that is more than we have a big loss in 2018 we have a loss of 2,491.59 crore rupees and in 2024 we have a loss of 534.53 crore rupees due to the floods and erosion in Assam. So my question to Dr. Borua, how can a resilient infrastructure be designed and developed, especially for Assam?
Yeah. Thank you for the question. I think, and I have been actually writing about it, for flood, unfortunately, both for flood and erosion, the interventions have been just the exact same continuation of colonial infrastructure, right? Embankment, right? That's all we do, most of the rivers are embanked. Or if we diversify a little bit, then you have some of the things that Brahmaputra board is doing, which are really neither climate resilient nor they are actually able to prevent flood and erosion. So there are many things that can be done. Something that in a recent piece that I wrote for the Telegraph, I highlighted that what needs to be done is, it's really kind of, we have enough knowledge that embankments are not working, and a river cannot be controlled, tamed by kind of building embankments on both sides. It will flow, right? It will find its way. So we really need to look at a basin level watershed management, floodplain management that has to be done at a larger scale, and that will involve multiple states, right? Not just Assam's flood is not just Assam's issue, right? We have to take into consideration the larger basin of the Brahmaputra. We have to look at more systematic rainwater harvesting, right? We have to look at reduction of deforestation in the Himalayas and the foothills, better kind of flood proofing, flood warning, flood capacity building, all of that. So those things have to be different set of interventions. And I would say not just rely on concrete. We are too much relying on concrete, right? Boulders. I think there is a role for more innovative, thoughtful, vegetative measures, right? And countries have done it. In fact, some people wrote some fantastic papers based on experience of Netherlands, like how vegetative measures can actually help, right? And in that, I would say, I think vis-a-vis flood and erosion, as well as the whole climate crisis, it's not just a question of technology and infrastructure. I really want to emphasize that it's not simply about what is the better set of infrastructure, or that's the whole debate on geoengineering. Like, okay, this is not working, come bring another set of infrastructure as if that will miraculously change everything. I think we really need to go down and talk to people and involve people in these activities, get their ideas, like people know a lot. I'll give you one, if I can, I'll give you one example. I'm from Majuli, and I have done my earlier research on the flood and erosion in Majuli. And one day I was sitting with a missing person, tribal person on the bank of the Brahmaputra, and in front of his house you have all kinds of machineries like JCBs and kind of, all the kind of stuffs going on there, RCC Porcupine and a lot of interventions. And then we're talking, and the man, he's an old man, he actually now died. He tells me in Assamese, I'll translate, he says, Bupai, nodikhon bor komol, moromare subo lage. He says the river is very delicate. It should be touched with love. Now that's wisdom, right? Now you tell it to a civil engineer who is hell-bent on constructing yet another structure, won't get it. Right? So how do we really go down and include people in designing things, in designing infrastructures that are actually going to work? Right? Most of the times our infrastructures are being washed away. Like during even my own field work in Majuli, I have witnessed how a lot of those infrastructures built by Brahmaputra Board were washed away.
Dr. Borua, as we are discussing about the practices, resilient practices, so Mr. Horma can explain us about if there is any traditional practices to combat these issues, because Dr. Horma Dangoria, মই যদি আপোনাৰ সন্মুখত কওঁ যে বিগত 7 বছৰত only in 7 years we have lost, total amount of loss was 17,509 crore rupees due to the floods in Assam.
Yeah, that is, this is intangible is much more loss actually, because monetarily, okay, 7,000 crores, not a big, huge amount. Otherwise, we are losing much more. See, flood control until unless we can restore the forest areas, runoff to jate hobo nware, we have to keep intact our natural forest. There is no alternative to that. And resilience to protect this, we have to go by nature-based solutions. Recently we had a talk, we had a very day-long, 2-day-long in fact, deliberations organized by the Water Resources Department in Assam. And a lot of people came from all over the world actually, all experts, Vinayati, Orubotu, Asilam, all over. So we had discussed thoroughly, and I had also suggested certain things, like, the river banks, we talk about the animal or the devastation that may cause or bring to the human lives, the lives and properties, but we do not talk about really the domesticated animals or the wild animals. We have to look at their, see, animals in Ataka we cannot live. Okay, our life is also dependent, all interdependent. So nature-based solutions, look, all along those embankments, we have certain species of plants. Kisman plants which can resist erosion, which can prevent, washing away all those embankments. Our economic livelihood, economy to amar badhabo pare. Like, jenko pati doi is no Scumanian taste to. Pati doi to it is Sital Patti. Worldwide is famous from Barak Valley or our Gwalpara Jikinias. In all swampy areas, our Pati doi to us like cane. Cane bahut water current to resist kurbo pare. Cane mane amar bed, jati bed it was. Of course, Kazirangat he mane bed bilag eta to weed hisabe we are treating. আজি আমাৰ উৰিয়াম গছটো আছে, উৰিয়াম গছটো পানীত হয়, শিমলু গছটো হয় পানীত, কিন্তু উৰিয়াম গছৰ পৰা কি কৰিব পাৰে মানুহ ধূনাৰ ছাবষ্টিটিউট হিচাপে পিপল আৰ নট ডুইং, আই এম জাষ্ট ডাইভাৰ্জিং দিছ থিংছ, হাউ দিছ ক্লেভাৰ ট্ৰেডাৰ্ছ দে আৰ ইউজিং আমাৰ উৰিয়াম গছটো কাটি নি ধূনা হিচাপে এতিয়া বিক্ৰী কৰি আছে. চ' দ'জ আৰ দ্য থিংছ উই মাষ্ট থিংক. এতিয়া আমাৰ যিবিলাক মেনগ্ৰোভছ আছে, ফ্ৰেছ ৱাটাৰ মেনগ্ৰোভ, আমাৰ হিজল বুলি কওঁ আমি, বেৰিংটনীয়া আইকতংগলা, যিটো আমাৰ কাজিৰঙাত আছে, পবিতৰাত আছে, তেমতো ৱাটাৰখিনি পিউৰিফাই কৰাৰ কাৰণেও মানে হিজল গছটো খুব ভাল. So there are a lot of spaces. Our Torah goes to us.
So there is a solution if need be.
Yeah. Those are the spaces which you plant along the embankments. Aru ghas bilak ase. Ghas bilakot amar etia vetiver opor adi kori. Napier gas to ase etia is also an exotic species. Napier to, but still we can hear and we have seen the Dulu Bora as a Nogot. Hati khana bekhno karne. See, because I'm directly involved with all those guys. Napier gas to kiman kini protein dibo pare. So those kind of alternatives we must think and go ahead with all those.
Yeah, Dr. Bura, would you like to
just to add one point to that?
Yeah.
I think fantastic examples coming from the field. But I think in resilience, more I think of resilience. It's so much actually. It calls for inward look, right? You have to really look into what we have, what has been our resilience. Like in Assam, for example, I think for resilience, we have so much to learn from all the Chor Sapuri dwellers, right? That's a landscape which is fluid, which is constantly changing as we see, right? Like they're constantly moving from one place to another. Sometimes some people I have worked with are moving 3 places to 3 places within a year with 200 to 300 buffaloes. They're changing new life, they're getting into new livelihoods, right? And so there's a lot we can learn from, I think, people live in those vulnerable, fluid kind of landscapes. So resilience need not be a Western concept that we draw on and kind of we think of how do we become resilient, but we have been resilient, right? How about people who have decided long ago to live on Sanghor? Stilt houses. Why do the missing people live on Sanghor? It's resilience, right? It's because they have been living on the flood plain and they have to protect themselves from flood, which of course has become part of their culture, but that's actually climate resilience. That's disaster resilience, right? I think there's a lot we can draw on what we have. I would just like to add that.
So now I have a question to Dr. Housing on policy-related issues that how can climate policy be made more inclusive?
I think answer to that question has to, underscore the interdependency or intermediacy between the local, the state, and the global. Because after all, climate change is a global phenomena. And the kind of adverse climatic change that we witness in Northeast India is not the doing of, people in the region. Because as we know, the major source of climate change is greenhouse emission. And according to the 12th Planning Commission report of 2012-2017, for example, the requirements of energy in terms of power energy requirement was something pitched to be like 1 lakh megawatt per year, out of which 76% are supposed to come from carbon economy and hardly about 20% from the hydel power project. And I think this is precisely where one of the important transformation that happens over time is, unlike the post-independent, multi-purpose hydel power project, for example, there is now increasing emphasis on, power generating hydel projects, which essentially means that the effect of these hydropower projects are not mitigative of environmental disaster because they are exclusively, obsessed with generating power. And as various studies suggest that hydropower projects have implication not just on the upper riparian societies, but also on lower riparian societies, not only in terms of the supplies of nutrients, as well as vitamins and minerals which are essential for the poor and communities which have traditionally survived on fishing as a vocation, right? There are also other important implications. For example, like climate change over the years is estimated to have increased temperature in Northeast India by 2035, 40 by around 1.5 to 2. This might be unexaggerated, a kind of aggregate, data that is generated. But the implication of this is also evident in terms of the, long spell of dry and drought that we witnessed in the last, say, 21 years. Out of the 21 years in the preceding years, 19 are witnessed by sparse, rainfall, like very, very least rainfall, which essentially means that Northeast India has now become one of the victims of climatic change over time. So what could be the policy option for us? One is, of course, that given that forest is a concurrent subject, and given that social and economic planning is also falling within what we call the concurrent subject, it also demands that there is a coordinated policy framework both at the national, state, as well as at the local level in ways that makes forest management or social forestry policies more inclusive as well as participatory. Unfortunately, we do not have any other alternative out of it.
So now coming back to Dr. Sohoria. Dr. Sohoria, deforestation is a matter of great concern to the northeastern states. So my question is, how does deforestation affect local communities and indigenous people?
Yeah, deforestation is happening, but more than deforestation, degradation of forest is more harming the local communities. What's degradation is, slowly the dense forest becomes, sparsely, the trees are being removed. When we meet our daily requirement from the forests are degraded. Even some across north, if you start from Kokrajhar to Balipara, you can see the first deforestation, now degradation. The both has happened. And we really have to take care. The communities living, we have to make them understand and also give them livelihood opportunities. You please don't say that, stop using the forest. You give them opportunities, then they will, like carbon finance. Once carbon finance, they will conserve the forest. So you have to give livelihood opportunities, you have to make them aware, you have to make them learn better use of the non-timber forest products. Therefore, then they can be benefited. Otherwise, we are totally dependent. The communities living there, they don't understand climate change. They don't understand what changes are taking place all around. You have to make them aware, make them feel that, and also one important point that I missed out, the northeastern region has most number of, tribal communities, and we all have our indigenous knowledge. So we are living there for years and years and living with floods, erosion, everything. So those conservation and documentation of indigenous knowledge is equally important to, have a more adaptation policy to be made out of that. So all these are so important from the northeastern perspective.
Thank you, Dr. Sohoria. Now I have a question to Dr. Borua. So what is the most critical steps towards people-centered climate governance? If we talk about people-centered climate governance.
What should be done?
Yeah.
Well, something that I have been already saying is to include people in I think all kind of, the policies that we design, whether it is to develop particular infrastructure, I think we have to include people in the decision making, but also at the same time, we have to draw on people's knowledge. Like I think Dr. Sohoria has said, we in Northeast actually is a repository of so much of indigenous knowledges, right? People have amazing sense of seasonality, right? I mean, I whenever I go to my village in Majuli, like, say, I don't stay there, so I would go home and I would love to eat something, right? Say, I want to eat koldil, right? Banana flower. But then people in the village would say, no, this is not the right month to eat. I can see the koldil there, but then, no, this is not the right month. Because there is this time when you are supposed to eat that. I want to eat bedgas. No, wait for the next one. What is all this? This is basically about understanding how we need to respond to the natural world around us. It's not, it's a gift to us, but it's not something for us to just go grab, right, whenever we want. So I think people-centric climate policies have to be, like at various levels, you need to include people in making decisions. You need to draw people's knowledges. You need to also make things meaningful for people. I mean, why would people come and participate? What's their stake in it, right? I remember long ago, I was part of an environmental NGO. It's called Foundation for Ecological Security. And with them, I worked in Rajasthan for several years in Udaipur. We really spent so much time talking to, these are tribal communities in Rajasthan, and whenever we went to there, we used to work on what is called common property resources governance, like mostly like forest lands and pasture lands which were degraded, and to regenerate those. And in Rajasthan, as you know, very little rainfall. And we go to people, and tell them, say, to be part of this. But their question is, but why? What's my stake in it? What would I get? Like, will my goats get some more fodder from this land or not? So I think it is both ways. It is not simply drawing on people's knowledge, but it's also about giving to them. Like, you have to be able to tell them. So we really had to spend a lot of time and energy to explain to people and make it kind of, really convince them that yet it has meaning for them and they could see it. So I think in Assam and Northeast, actually that's a big gap in the Northeast. I think we have an absence of civil society organizations. I think there has to be, I have seen in many parts of India that works as a fantastic buffer, right? The state and the people, and there are NGOs and other civil society groups. We do have some in Northeast, but compared to Rajasthan, Gujarat, and Karnataka, South India, it's very, very limited scope.
So now I have a question to Dr. Sharma. The question is to be on forest management. Because we have an issue of invasive plants and species, and that has been affecting our wildlife. What is your take on this?
Okay. You mean to say something about this Kaziranga National Park, I think, because I had published certain articles in international journals, those came up. Because our scientists basically were working there in Kaziranga National Park are some local organizations like Aranyak, Wildlife Trust of India, or Wildlife Institute of India were really doing some very serious works on this, which basically invasive species. Now, after joining Kaziranga National Park, I found that I've gone through certain articles, Mycenia and very small plants, they were identifying as weeds, that they were creating problems. It is not only that, Metakao asile, kintu in the larger part we saw, jenika ajar gostu ase, Lysostomia species, Sida gos again Lysostomia, the belik species. ঠিক তেনেকৈ আমাৰ বৰুণ গছটো আছে, ভেলকৰ বিলাক আছে, বিশেষকৈ আছে আমাৰ শিমলু, because we remove the simul trees in lakhs. Interestingly, I spoke to some very senior scientists in WII. I said, why not we remove the roots of simul trees, because a lot of medicinal companies, they want the roots of all those, because they're used as aphrodisiacs. Simul trees to root ase. Said we cannot remove this because this has to remain in the park itself as a biomass. We cannot remove anything from our national parks. Now I find personally something wrong in the entire policy of management of our parks. Apnaloke jane je there are as many as 19 species of grasses within national parks of Kaziranga or adjoining areas. But all these grasses, they are not equally nutritious. Question as a layman, I was asking myself, যে কাজিৰঙাৰ গড়বিলাক সৰু কেলে, কাজিৰঙাৰ হাতীবিলাক সৰু কেলে, কাজিৰঙাৰ হাতীবিলাক কেলে কাজিৰঙাৰ ভিতৰত বাহিৰত কেলে নাযায়, and কাজিৰঙাৰ গড়বিলাকৰ longevity কেলে কম. This is nothing. See, a lot of experts, animal experts, I just asked these questions. There's just stoic silence. They're not speaking anything on this. This is because narrowly there is lack of fodder. It is not the grasses for which these animals they thrive. That primarily herbivores ase, bahut animals ase, huge. Density of population is much more in Kaziranga. You just cannot imagine. Iman khini tat carrying capacity nai tat. এই ঘাঁহবিলাক খাইছে ঠাণ্ডাৰ দিনত কোনটো ঘাঁহ ভাল খাই ভাল পাব, নিউট্ৰিচিয়াছ পাব জানো নাপায়. So we proposed, I tell you why. Bagorit amar dudukhor mati in 1987. I said those were being encroached by some, doubtful.
Dr. Sharma, we have to get into our question and answer session.
Right.
Before that, I have a last question to Dr. Housing. My question is to you on that: how can governments be held accountable for climate commitments? Why I am asking this question, and you have to say a few words very briefly to what is the role should be played by our parliamentarian from northeastern regions in this regards.
I think one of the important and pressing call today is to fix accountability as well as transparency in the flow of funds. One of the great, exemplar of this is in Manipur, for example. 90% of the areas falls within the hill areas, which means that there is a preponderant coverage of forest area. But if you look at the budgetary expenditure on forest between 2017 to 2021, for example, more than 2/3 of the expenditure on forest are spent on the valley areas, which does not have much of a forest cover. I think in that sense, power asymmetry also inevitably spills over into some of these environmental priorities. I think this has to be fixed. The flow of funds have to be transparent as well as be driven by issues of equity and justice. And I think this is a concern that in effect should be fixed at all levels, whether it is at the state, at the national, and for that matter, at the international level, in order to mitigate, the adverse effects of climate change in our livelihood.
Thank you, Mr. Hasing. So now it's time to go for question and answer sessions. It's over to you, Minalla.
Shivangi Shivam.
So my question was that how can we deal with the issue of encroachment and deforestation in Northeast? Because it leads to very adverse social effect also. So how can we properly deal with that?
So basically, why we encroach, we have to see that first. There are reasons for encroachment. Like, when he said about erosion, when your whole house goes out, where you go and settle? So, one is erosion. Assam has lots of encroachment issues because of erosion. So the government has to have firm policies how to deal with people that becomes landless. One, so therefore that the exact reason. And some of the encroachment is for livelihood purpose. So that, all things are connected. You have policies for providing houses. You should have policies for providing livelihood. Therefore, that you have to, stop encroachment. Removing encroachment is more and more becoming a law and order issue. You have to deal with a lot of care so that, people are not, they have to be resettled somewhere. So it has to be a balance. And regarding forest degradation and deforestation, it has happened through years. We really have to go for large-scale plantation and restore our forest, for which I have said that, you have to mobilize the communities to make them understand why forest is important, because they think it otherwise. They think that urban people are enjoying and we have to preserve the forest. So you have to balance them. You have to say that this is your livelihood, this is your trainings, that you can make your livelihood, make a better life, and therefore you preserve your forest. And carbon finance could be one of the way for the northeastern region, because we are rich in forest and biodiversity, including medicinal plants, where we need to do lots of farming, produce the right medicinal plants and sell it wherever it's possible.
My question is basically related to the changes in climate that we're observing. Last couple of decades, significant weather events we have witnessed along the Himalayan ranges, we can say J&K, Himachal, to some extent over northeastern parts of the country. So would you like to comment upon, sir, whether there is any sort of modification of the weather is taking place along this region, taking into account our adversaries towards our north as well as east? Because,
you would like to direct the question to whom?
Sorry, sir, maybe, sir, if you could.
You must be the favorite of all.
Thank you, Commander Pranjal. The most important part is climate is changing. We are all feeling it. And last year, if you see, the average global climate was about 18 point something, I don't remember exactly, centigrade. And it was the highest in many decades. It's the highest. And we have reached to an average of about 1.8 degrees centigrade higher. So we are all affected, and especially the Himalayan range, from Jammu and Kashmir to northeastern region, we are affected. Even affected are because of the rising sea level. The temperature high, you have, the problem of drinking water in the hills. The whole northern belt is affected by drinking water issues. You have problems of irrigation, your crop production is suffering, climate change is happening, and it is real. I have pointed out some of them, and therefore, the livelihood have changed. Sudden disasters make you homeless. The rains in Uttarakhand and Manali and all this that has happened, that have changed lives of many people. So we have to be resilient, we have to have an adaptation policy, and we have to have a lot of investment. And as per the Paris Agreement and all this that are happening in every COP, there are programs that are happening where the developed countries are funding the developing countries to have, funding especially for climate change. And one of the way is through this, clean development mechanism that, you finance and you get the credit for offsetting the carbon emission in those countries. So that is the way out. We will all have to fight it together. India has a plan. I'll not make it very long. I can go and speak.
The question that I wanted to ask you is, are there some drawbacks in the policies made by the government regarding climate change? And can you also give some solutions if you think so?
That's a big question, and if I can give you some solutions to address climate change, I mean, well, there have been, like all the discussion in Paris climate, I think we have been discussing, so I can't, there are of course a lot of drawbacks, like the thing we make commitments, but like in Paris, for example, the intended commitments that we make, but do we live up to those? That's the thing, right? We actually, India, in fact, now that I think of, we talked about, in Paris, for example, we committed about reducing coal consumption, to particular, I'm forgetting the figure, but actually coal production gone up massively after, okay? So there are a lot of contradictions in terms of what we commit and what we end up doing, right? So I think, there are many solutions that are out there. People talk about it's in fact, adaptation, talking about adaptation is, for a lot of environmentalists, it's a defeatist stand, right? To talk about adaptation, that we have to adapt, that we can't do anything about mitigating climate change, right? So there are things that we can do, and there are a lot of solutions out there, climate scientists have pointed out, but we really have to live up to our commitments. That's all I can say.
So Horia wants to just
to add on that,
But be brief, huh?
Yeah, India has a target of, producing 500 gigawatt of non-fossilized energy by 2030. Out of that 500, 300 would be from solar. So things are happening. We have a target to meet, and by 2070, we have to become net zero. So we will not see those days, but you will be there to feel the, net zero effect of 2070. So
just to add one more thing is, like some problems sometimes when I teach about, any of these issues in my classes, I tell students, don't ask me for a solution immediately. Let's understand what the problem is first.
Yes, that's very correct.
We are often going for a solution which become quick fixes, which actually are part of the problem, right? So I think it's very important to sit back a little bit and see, okay, where have we gone wrong? How can we rectify some of that? It's solutions are always very tech heavy, which are, to me, not really solutions.
I basically wanted to know what is the panel's take on the intersection of the indigenous land rights and climate change policy, now that we are in a space which I call perhaps a very uber capitalist space where the voices of the indigenous people are actually missing. And thank you for mentioning about the need or the importance of traditional practices, but then what about the legal framework that can include the indigenous voices, sir?
I think your point is quite valid. And I think, you see, one of the adverse implications of this politics of enclosure is that the indigenous communities who are traditional landowners have become overnight as encroacher on land, and that essentially entails the deprivation of, traditional rights to indigenous or tribal communities, which is true not only in the context of Northeast India, thanks to the, series of policy prescription like inner line reserved, protected forest or reserve forest, which in effect would render tribal landowners as encroachers on their traditional source of livelihood. That's precisely where I think one of the way out, which is emanating from international discourse, is the possidetis juris, which essentially means that there should be a legal instrument which recognizes the owner of the land. And that's precisely what, for example, the Tribal and Forest Dwellers Act, 2016 seeks to do by ensuring that any developmental activities which infringe on tribal land or tribal property should be, in effect, guided by prior and informed consent, right? And I think it is, therefore, important to, in effect, fulfill our international commitment, as Dr. Baru was pointing out, to also actually, work in the way we treat with indigenous or Adivasis communities in India. And I think that's one. The second, of course, is that most of these so-called developmentalist projects are driven by a very shoddy environmental impact assessment. And in this environmental impact assessment, they are overly driven by private interests. And when these private interests do upfront, payment to government of India, which essentially means that the government has sacrificed much of its agency and autonomy in deciding, what is good for long-term sustainable development priorities, then I think at the receiving end of such, very careless, casual developmentalist approach is that indigenous communities, and for that matter, the larger community at large, become the victims of such developmentalist, projects which have, very adverse climatic implication as well.
Can I please have a small follow-up question, please?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah. Sir, as you talked about the identification of the land, owners of the land, sir, don't you think there's a larger need to do away with the capitalist system to do that for a better holistic view of the solution regarding climate change?
Yeah, I would go with you. That yes, I think at some point we really need to look at what we need is a structural change. Yeah, it's so there is a problem in the economic order, right? Which is very kind of the whole development model, right? Which is deeply problematic. So within that, what is happening actually? Some people have been writing about it. Is that the whole kind of market-driven solution to climate change, right? We talk about now payment for ecosystem services, carbon credit, which are seemingly solution, but they're part of the problem too, because then we are actually looking at solutions to the climate crisis through market mechanisms, which are problem at the first place, right? So I think there is an urgent need to look at larger structural questions, not just techno fixes, which I find deeply problematic actually. Yeah. So
let me add to it. That's why way back in 1986, the Bruton report came in. You must have read. I don't know if you have read. Please go through it. And we talked about sustainable development. Sustainable development is that you use enough resource now so that you leave the resources for the future, so that you all, the young people, you are the future. So we at the present policymakers should think about the future and make resource available for you all in the future. So then we talk about the intergenerational equity.
So now I want to conclude this conversation, and before concluding this discussion, I would like to thank our panelists and audience once again for giving us their precious times. And we hope that this conversation will send a positive and a strong message towards the society. অনুষ্ঠানৰ আৰম্ভতে মই কৈছিলোঁ যে ক্লাইমেট চেঞ্জ আৰু বিশেষকৈ খৰাংজনিত পৰিস্থিতিয়ে দক্ষিণ আফ্ৰিকাৰ দেশ কিছুমানত কি পৰিস্থিতি সৃষ্টি কৰিছে, বিশেষকৈ নামিবিয়া, সাউথ সুদান আৰু জিম্বাবুৱেত কি সমস্যাৰ সৃষ্টি হৈছে সেয়া আমি দেখিছিলোঁ। কিন্তু আমাৰ অসমত কি হৈছে সেয়া আমি কিমান খবৰ লৈছোঁ, ইটছ এ বিগ কুৱেশ্যন টু আছ। আৰু যাবৰ সময়ত মই এটা তথ্য আপোনালোকৰ সন্মুখত দাঙি ধৰিব খুজিছোঁ, এইলৈ আলোচনা কৰিব যে আমি অন্য দেশত কি হৈছে আমি খবৰ ৰাখিছোঁ, আমি নিজৰ খবৰবোৰ আমি ৰাখিব লাগিব ভালকৈ। আৰু এই কথাটো মই দিল্লীত এই কাৰণে উল্লেখ কৰি যাব খুজিছোঁ যে আমাৰ যিসকল পলিচি মেকাৰ্ছ আছে, আমাৰ যিসকল এমপিজ আছে, তেওঁলোক ইয়াতেই থাকে, তেওঁলোকে এই কথাবোৰ ভালকৈ চাব পাৰিব যে আমাৰ ইয়াত খৰাংজনিত সমস্যা, খৰাঙৰ সমস্যা আমাৰ ইয়াত হৈছে। এই ছেপ্টেম্বৰ অক্টোবৰ মাহত আমাৰ খেতিয়কসকলে পানী পোৱা নাই, তেওঁলোকে হাহাকাৰ কৰি ফুৰিবলগীয়া হৈছে আমাৰ অন্নদাতাসকলে। আহিন মাহত আমাৰ যিবোৰ আগৰ কবিতা আছিলে, নিয়ৰত দুবৰি বন তিতি থাকে, এতিয়া কিন্তু আমি আহিন মাহত আমি অসমত গুৱাহাটীত বিশেষকৈ আমি 39 ডিগ্ৰী চেলচিয়াছলৈকে আমি পাৰাস্তম্ভ গৈছেগৈ। গতিকে এই কথাবোৰ আমি ভালদৰে ডিছকাশ্যন কৰিব লাগিব। আৰু বিশেষকৈ মই দুটা তথ্য আপোনালোকৰ সন্মুখত দাঙি মই এই অনুষ্ঠানৰ পৰা মই বিদায় ল'ম যে আমাৰ ইয়াত খাদ্যৰ সংকট হোৱা নাই কিন্তু খাদ্য সংকট হোৱাৰ দিশে হয়তো আমি অগ্ৰসৰ হ'বলৈ গৈ আছোঁ আমাৰ কৃষকসকলে এই কথা ভালকৈ বুজি পায় আৰু বিশেষকৈ আমাৰ যিবোৰ ডিফৰেষ্টেশ্যন ইছ্যু আছে এই ইছ্যুবোৰৰ কাৰণে আমাৰ ফৰেষ্টৰ পৰিমাণ লাহে লাহে কমি গৈছে আৰু এই পৰিমাণ কমি যোৱাৰ বাবে আমাৰ যিবোৰ বিশেষকৈ আমাৰ খাদ্য শস্যত প্ৰভাৱ পৰিছে আমাৰ বনৰীয়া জীৱ জন্তুৰ সৈতে আমাৰ সংঘাত হৈছে আৰু বিশেষকৈ আমাৰ মেন এলিফেণ্ট যিটো কনফ্লিক্ট এই কনফ্লিক্টটো এটা জটিল ৰূপ ধাৰণ কৰিছে আৰু বিশেষকৈ মই যদি কওঁ যে ইন বিটুইন 2010 and 2020 1,135 people have died in Assam due to the man-elephant conflict. It's not a matter of joke. 1,137 people have been died due to the man-elephant conflict in Assam in between 2010 and 2023. And at the same time, at least 800 wild elephants have been killed due to the man-elephant conflict in Assam. আৰু এই যিবোৰ সমস্যা এই সমস্যাবোৰ আমি সমাধান বিচাৰিছোঁ আৰু উইথ ডেট নোট মই এই অনুষ্ঠানৰ পৰা বিদায় লৈছোঁ ধন্যবাদ